Now, we know that Ray Charles did this quite broadly. This song, I've Got a Savior, appears to have come from Clara Ward and the Ward sisters. Clara Ward, whose most famous protege is Aretha Franklin, is an astounding gospel singer. And she had written hundreds of gospel songs. And we know that Charles took another of her songs, which was called This Little Light of Mine. And he had changed that song into This Little Girl of Mine. Once again, exactly the same transposition, the girl for the Savior. So let's listen now to Clara Ward and This Little Light of Mine. And please note just how amazing Clara Ward's lungs are. The woman is not human. Okay, This Little Light of Mine. Okay, so now we have This Little Girl of Mine from Ray Charles.
Another this little girl of mine called me last night about 8. This little girl of mine told me that we had a date. She said that she'd meet me at 8:45. Believe it or not, but she was right on time, and that's why oh, love the little girl of mine. Do you know that this little girl of mine knows how to dress so neat? This little girl of mine stops the traffic on the street. When the fellas start whistling, well, I don't mind. I can't blame them because she is fine. That's why oh, love the little girl of mine. And that's why
Thanks. If we have time later, we'll come back. The first one, This Little Light of Mine, got curtailed, and we actually didn't get to hear Clara Ward's lungs, which are truly astounding. So if we have time at the end, I'll play that for you. Clara Ward was extremely irritated by what Ray Charles had done, as I might understand. She had written one song that everybody knew about, and I would claim in the I've Got a Savior, another song which the music historians managed to lose track of, and seen it effectively turned to purposes that she found quite sacrilegious. She saw it not just as sacrilegious, but as a slap against gospel as a form of music. And she was furious about it. But as I'll talk about in the legal section of this talk, it never occurred to her, and indeed it may not have been true, that she had any kind of legal right to prevent him from doing what she was saying. Her objection was aesthetic and religious, not legal, not one of rights infringed, but of genres suborned and faith made mock of. So I could continue to go back with this story. It turns out that I Got a Savior was based on an earlier spiritual called Ain't That Good News, which recounts what the singer will have in heaven, which includes, you'll be glad to know, not only a harp and a robe, but slippers. Well, if you've got a robe, right, you need slippers. I mean, I presume this was what was going on in the singer's mind. And of course, Ain't That Good News relies still earlier spirituals. But the point here is, I think, a simple one. The legendary K.O. samples Kanye West, who uses a fragment from Ray Charles, who might have taken material from Will Lamartine Thompson, or more likely from Clara Ward, who herself borrows from a gospel standard that in turn was based on a spiritual. The chain of borrowing I've described here has one end in the hymns and spirituals of the early 1900s, and the other in the 21st century's chaotic stew of digital remix, sampling, and mashup. And along the way, the way of this musical journey, we actually have the synthesis of old and the creation of new musical genres. Soul did not exist as such in the 1940s. It was precisely this process of fusion that created it. The message certainly changes. The exalted savior becomes the open-pursed, good-natured lover of Mr. Charles, then the grasping gold digger of Mr. West's, and then is entirely changed to become a hook with which to beat George Bush and his failed response in Hurricane Katrina, at least according to the legendary K.O. But I want to ask two questions. How does paying for every fragment of music change the creation of music? And in some cases, even if an artist was willing to pay, would the music get created? Let's think of the first one. Imagine jazz under the system that I have just outlined and that now dominates the music business. This is a system where quoting from anybody else's work of anything in copyright requires for a payment and a license. And certainly digitally sampling their music requires a payment and a license. Imagine someone attempting to create a jazz song. Let's say they use the standard rhythm chords taken from I Got Rhythm by Gershwin. Let's say they solo from another song, from Happy Birthday, say, in the course of it. Let's say that the saxophonist works in several homages to other jazz composers or other artists. In theory, according to the rules that we are now applying to other musicians, each of those samplings would require a license. Now, in fact, jazz has existed for a long time as a kind of special area where we sort of in the back of our minds know that if we actually applied the law the way it exists on the books, we'd utterly destroy the art form. And that's okay because federal district court judges and federal court of appeals judges listens to jazz on their radio and they know that it's highbrow music, that it is to be protected, and any legal argument that comes to the conclusion that jazz is illegal has to be wrong. They're right. They're profoundly right. The difficulty is, what is the implication of that argument for all of the other less reputable forms of music, the ones less likely to be found on the judiciary's iPods? The second question is, in some cases, even with payment, would the work get created? Take Clara Ward. Ms. Ward was a fascinating person. She was an extremely prolific composer. She was a very smart business person. She was someone who made gospel itself an incredible commercial success, but who also apparently was quite concerned that her message not be sullied. For example, she, like Mr. Lamartine Thompson, interestingly, created her own publishing house because she wasn't happy with the way that her works were being presented. She wanted a lot of creative control. And she was very upset with what Mr. Charles was doing. If she had a legal right to forbid him, would she have? If she had existed in a copyright culture in which the norm was that every use must be paid for, would she have granted permission even if a fee had been offered? I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not sure any of us do.